What happens when a liberal professor sets out to publicly discredit a student he assumes is nothing more than a quiet name with inherited privilege only, to find himself standing before a prodigy with a 170 IQ and a command of mathematics that could rival the greatest minds in academia? You're about to find out. And by the time you finish this story, you may look at the quiet kid in the back row a little differently. This story unfolded at Eastborough University, one of the most prestigious and politically charged academic institutions on the East Coast. The setting, Dr. William Hawthorne's advanced calculus lecturian auditorium, filled with hand-picked, top-tier students and a professor known as much for his ideological monologues as for his mathematical prowess. That Tuesday morning, the tension was palpable as students filed into the towering lecture hall. Usually, the whiteboard would already be covered in a maze of Greek letters and integrals. But today, only one sentence greeted them, scrawled boldly in blue dry erase marker. Today's topic: the role of social equity in STEM. Some students sighed, others exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't new. Dr. Hawthorne had a reputation for weaving socio-political commentary into equations and often graded more on ideological alignment than academic merit. But one student in particular didn't move an inch. In the last row, seated with perfect posture in a black tailored suit, sat a tall, quiet young man named Lucien Carrington. Lucien rarely spoke in class. He was polite, impeccably dressed, always on time. Most assumed he was another legacy student with connections rather than intellect. What they didn't know was that Lucien had scored in the 99.99th percentile on every standardized math exam since he was 9 years old, had privately studied with 3 former field medalists, and was fluent in 4 languages including German, which would become important very soon. Dr. Hawthorne, pacing across the stage in his signature tweed jacket, cleared his throat and launched into his lecture. Mathematics, while historically grounded in logic and reason, he began, must evolve. We cannot ignore that for centuries it has served certain privileged groups more than others. Meritocracy, in its purest form, is a myth. Equity, not just equality, must guide our curriculum. Several students nodded dutifully. Others shifted uncomfortably. And Lucien? He raised his hand. That caught Hawthorne off guard. He paused, eyebrows raised. Yes, Mr. Carrington. Lucien's voice was calm, deliberate. Professor, I appreciate the intent behind equity. But if we dilute academic rigor in mathematics, we risk disadvantaging everyone, regardless of background. There was a pause. The air turned electric. Dr. Hawthorne narrowed his eyes. Easy for you to say, he replied, tone tinged with sarcasm. You, of all people, should understand that not everyone had elite prep schools or private tutoring to fall back on. Lucien nodded slowly. That's true. I had resources, and I acknowledge that privilege, which is why I believe in high standards. Not to gatekeep, but to ensure that anyone who earns it truly owns it. A few students murmured in agreement. Others looked stunned. But Hawthorne wasn't done. So you're suggesting, he said, pacing slowly, that you know better than your professor about what standards should be? No, Lucien replied evenly. I'm suggesting that mathematics is a universal language. It doesn't know race, gender, or background, and it deserves to be preserved in its integrity. Hawthorne stared for a moment, then turned abruptly to the whiteboard. All right then, he said coldly. Let's put your universal language to the test. With swift strokes, he filled the board with a multi-variable integral so complex it looked like it belonged in a graduate thesis. Several students paled. It was the kind of problem meant to break confidence. But Lucien stood up slowly, walked down the lecture steps, and took the marker from the professor's hand without hesitation. Would you prefer the standard solution, he asked the class, or the one I found in Leibniz's original manuscripts? His method reduces the workload by 60%. Leibniz? Hawthorne scoffed. You've read his unpublished methods? In the original German, Lucien replied. The English translations misinterpret his treatment of convergence. The room fell silent. Students leaned forward. Lucien began. Not just solving the problem, but explaining each step in a way that even the weakest students could follow. He outlined both the traditional and the alternate method, breaking the wall between complexity and clarity. His voice didn't tremble. His logic didn't falter. And as he wrote, it became clear this was not memorization, it was mastery. 10 minutes later, he capped the marker and stepped back. A stunned silence lingered, then came the applause. And just when the room thought the moment was over, the doors flew open. In walked Dr. Malcolm Ruiz, chair of the department. He took in the scene. A lecture hall buzzing with shock, a whiteboard filled with perfect calculations, a professor red-faced and motionless. "Hawthorne," Ruiz said, voice low but firm. "What exactly are you doing?" Dr. Hawthorne tried to respond, but before he could spin the situation, Ruiz stepped toward the board, examining Lucien's work line by line. "This is elegant," he said. "Concise. Who did this?" Lucien raised his hand slightly. "I did, sir." Ruiz turned to Hawthorne. "And you were attempting to what?" "Shame your student in front of the class." The silence was brutal. "I miscalculated his capabilities," Hawthorne admitted. Clearly, Ruiz studied him. Indeed, that night, the video went viral across campus. By morning, it was trending on academic forums nationwide. The footage showed not just Lucien's performance, but the shift in atmosphere, the recognition on students' faces, the impact of one moment of intellectual integrity. In the days that followed, enrollment in advanced calculus doubled. Not because students wanted an easy ride, but because they wanted to be part of something real. Dr. Hawthorne, to his credit, changed. He started inviting students to challenge assumptions, to lead whiteboard sessions, to explore alternate methods even if they conflicted with his own beliefs. Lucien, meanwhile, began hosting after-class problem-solving groups, tutoring students who once felt left behind. He broke the stereotype of the unapproachable genius and replaced it with the image of the humble leader. One afternoon, while Lucien was helping a student derive an optimization theorem, Dr. Hawthorne approached him. "You could have humiliated me that day," he said quietly. "But you didn't." Lucien looked up. "I never wanted to win. I wanted us all to learn." Hawthorne offered a slow nod. "I underestimated you." "Most people do," Lucien said, not bitterly but with an understanding that had clearly been earned. By the end of the year, Lucien Carrington's name was etched into campus lore not because of his surname or family wealth, but because of how he redefined what it meant to stand for something greater than yourself. He wasn't just a prodigy who solved the impossible equation. He was the student who, in a single morning, turned a lecture hall into a revolution and reminded an entire institution that the true power of knowledge lies not in flaunting it, but in sharing it.